Hoichi the Earless. More than 700 years ago, the final battle between the Taira clan, also known as the Heike, and the Minamoto clan, also known as the Genji, took place at Dan no Yura in the Straits of Shimonoseki. In this battle, the Heike were utterly destroyed, along with the women, children, and the young emperor, who is remembered today as Emperor Antoku. For 700 years, the sea and shores of Dan no Yura have been haunted by their vengeful spirits. Elsewhere, I have told my readers about the strange crabs found there, known as Heike crabs, whose backs bear patterns resembling human faces. These are said to be the souls of the Heike warriors. But along that entire coastline, many other mysterious things have been witnessed and heard. On dark nights, countless ghostly fires drift about on the shore or flicker over the waves, a bluish light that fishermen call onibi or demon fire. When the wind rises, loud cries can be heard from the sea, like the clamor of a great battle. The spirits of the Heike were much more restless in the past than they are now. They would appear beside boats at night, trying to sink them, or lie in wait for swimmers to drag them under the water. To appease these dead souls, the Buddhist temple of Amida-ji was built in Akamagaseki, Shimonoseki, and its cemetery was located near the coast. There, stone monuments were erected, inscribed with the names of the drowned emperor and his followers. Buddhist memorial services were regularly held for the repose of their souls. After the temple was established and the graves built, the Heike spirits caused fewer disasters. However, from time to time, strange occurrences still took place, evidence that they had not yet found complete peace. Several centuries ago, there lived in Akamagaseki a blind man named Hoichi. He was famous throughout the land for his skill in reciting and playing the biwa, a lute-like instrument. From a young age, Hoichi had been trained in singing and playing the biwa, and even as a boy, he had surpassed his teachers. As a professional biwa player, he became renowned for reciting the stories of the Heike and Genji clans, and it was said that even demons could not hold back their tears when he sang of the Battle of Dan no Yura. Hoichi was very poor at the beginning of his career, but he had a kind friend who helped him, the head priest of Amida-ji, who loved poetry and music. The priest often invited Hoichi to the temple to play the biwa and recite stories. Later, deeply impressed by the boy's remarkable talent, the priest offered Hoichi a home in the temple. Grateful for this generous offer, Hoichi accepted. He was given a room in the temple and, in return for food and lodging, was only required to play the biwa for the priest on quiet evenings. One summer night, the head priest was called to perform a Buddhist memorial service at the home of a deceased parishioner, leaving Hoichi alone at the temple with only the temple servant for company. Since it was a hot evening, the blind Hoichi stepped out onto the veranda in front of his sleeping quarters to cool off. The veranda overlooked the small garden behind Amida-ji temple. While waiting for the head priest to return, Hoichi comforted himself by practicing his biwa, lute. Midnight had already passed, but the priest had not returned. The air was still oppressively hot, so Hoichi stayed outside. Soon, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the back gate. Someone crossed the garden and stopped right in front of the veranda where Hoichi was sitting. It was not the head priest. A powerful voice called his name, abruptly and rudely, as if summoning a servant. Hoichi? Hoichi was so startled that he didn't reply for a moment. The voice called out again in a commanding tone. Hoichi? Yes. The blind man, frightened by the threatening voice, replied, I am blind. I do not know who is calling me. The stranger softened his tone and said, There is nothing to fear. I am a retainer of a noble who lives nearby, and I have come with a message for you. My lord is of very high rank, and he is currently staying here in a Kamigaseki with many splendid retainers. Today, he visited the battlefield of Dan no Yura, and having heard that you are skilled at reciting the story of that battle, he wishes to hear your performance. So, please bring your biwa and come with me at once to the noble's residence. At that time, a samurai's command was not to be refused, so Hoichi put on his sandals, took his biwa, and followed the stranger. The man guided him expertly, but Hoichi had to walk quickly to keep up. The hand that led him was as firm as iron, and the clinking sound of the man's armor indicated that he was fully armored, likely a warrior on guard duty for a high-ranking lord. As Hoichi's initial fear faded, he began to think of his good fortune. He remembered the retainer's mention of a man of very high rank, and assumed that the lord who wished to hear him must be a powerful daimyo. Eventually, the samurai stopped. Hoichi realized they had reached a large gate. He found this strange, as he did not recall any grand gates in the area, except for the main gate of Amida-ji Temple. Open the gate. The samurai called, and the sound of a bolt being drawn could be heard. The two entered. They crossed a spacious garden, and then stopped again in front of another entrance. The warrior called out, Someone inside. I've brought Hoichi. Footsteps approached, sliding doors opened, and the sounds of women's voices filled the air. From their speech, Hoichi understood that they were servants of a noble house, but he had no idea where he had been taken. Soon, Hoichi was led up several stone steps and told to remove his sandals at the top. A woman then guided him across polished wooden floors, past countless pillars, and through vast tatami-covered rooms. He was finally brought to the center of a large hall, where he sensed that many people were gathered. The sound of silk robes rustling was like the leaves of a forest. There was also a low murmur of voices, speaking in the refined tones of the imperial court. Hoichi was told to relax, and he realized a cushion had been prepared for him. He sat down and tuned his biwa. A woman's voice, which Hoichi assumed belonged to an elderly maid or head of the female attendants, spoke to him. Please play and recite the tale of the Heike for us now, accompanying it with your biwa. Reciting the entire tale would take several nights, so Hoichi respectfully asked, I cannot recite the whole story in one sitting, but which section would the Lord like to hear? The woman replied, Please perform the account of the Battle of Dan no Yura. It is the most moving part of the story. Hoichi raised his voice and began to sing the tale of the fierce naval battle. With his biwa, he recreated the sound of oars pulling through the water, the hiss of arrows flying through the air, the cries of warriors, the clashing of swords against helmets, and the splashes of men falling into the sea. During his performance, Hoichi heard whispers of admiration around him. What an amazing biwa player. I've never heard anything like this in my homeland. There's no one in the country who can sing like Hoichi. Encouraged by these words, Hoichi played and sang even more passionately. The audience fell into a stunned silence. But when he reached the sorrowful end, the tragic fate of the women and children, and the heartbreaking scene of the nun of second rank plunging into the sea with the young emperor in her arms, everyone let out a long, tremulous sigh of anguish, and then they broke into uncontrollable sobbing. Hoichi himself was astonished by the intensity of the grief he had stirred. For a while, the sobbing continued. But gradually, the voices quieted, and in the profound silence that followed, Hoichi heard the voice of the elderly woman again. We had heard that you are a master of the biwa, and that there is no one who can rival your singing. But we never imagined that you possessed such extraordinary skill as you have shown us tonight. The Lord is most impressed and intends to reward you generously. However, he requests that you perform for him again every night for the next 6 nights. After that, he will likely leave this place. Therefore, tomorrow night at the same hour, you must come here again. The same retainer who brought you tonight will come to escort you. There is one more thing. The Lord has commanded that, during his stay in Akamagaseki, you must not speak of these visits to anyone. He is traveling incognito, so you must keep all of this strictly confidential. You are free to return to your temple now. After expressing his gratitude, Hoichi was guided to the entrance, where the same retainer was waiting. The retainer then led him back to the veranda of the temple and took his leave. Hoichi returned just before dawn, but no one noticed that he had been away from the temple. The priest had returned very late, and assumed that Hoichi was asleep. During the day, Hoichi managed to get some rest, and he did not mention the strange event to anyone. The following night, the samurai came again to escort Hoichi to the gathering of the noble people, where he performed his recitation once more, achieving the same success as before. However, during this second visit, it was accidentally discovered that Hoichi had been absent from the temple. After his return in the morning, he was summoned by the priest, who gently rebuked him, saying, "Hoichi, we have been very worried about you. You cannot see, and going out alone so late at night is dangerous. Why did you leave without telling us? Had you informed us, we would have sent a servant to accompany you. So, where have you been?" Hoichi replied, timidly. "Please forgive me, Reverend. I had a personal matter to attend to, and there was no other time I could deal with it." The priest was more astonished than concerned by Hoichi's silence. He sensed that something unnatural was going on, and he feared that Hoichi might have been possessed by an evil spirit or deceived in some way. Without pressing further, he secretly instructed one of the temple servants to keep an eye on Hoichi's movements. If he were to leave the temple again after dark, the servant was to follow him. That very next evening, the temple attendants saw Hoichi sneaking out of the temple, and they immediately lit lanterns and followed him. However, it was a rainy night and very dark, so before they could make it out onto the road, Hoichi's figure vanished. Indeed, he walked at a remarkably quick pace. Considering his blindness, it was quite astonishing, especially since the road was bad. The men hurried through the town to the house where Hoichi usually went, but no one there knew anything about him. Eventually, as they returned to the temple from the direction of the beach, they heard the sound of a biwa being played in the cemetery of Amida Temple, which surprised them all. Apart from 2 or 3 flickering will-o'-the-wisps, usually visible in that dark night, the area was completely black. Nevertheless, the men hurried to the cemetery, and with the light of the lanterns, they found Hoichi there, sitting alone in the rain before the memorial grave of Emperor Antoku, playing his biwa and reciting songs about the Battle of Dan no Yura. Behind him and all around, numerous spirits' lanterns burned like candles on many graves. Never before had so many will-o'-the-wisps been seen by human eyes. "Hoichi? Hoichi?" the attendants called out. "You are being possessed by something, Hoichi." But it seemed the blind man could not hear them. With all his might, Hoichi played the biwa, striking it vigorously, reciting the song of the Battle of Dan no Yura with increasing intensity. The men grasped Hoichi and leaned in close to shout in his ear. "Hoichi? Hoichi? Come home with us right now." Annoyed, Hoichi replied to the men, "It's intolerable for you to interrupt me in front of these noble people." Despite the eerie nature of the situation, the attendants couldn't help but laugh. It was clear that Hoichi was under some kind of spell, so they seized him, lifted him to his feet, and hurriedly brought him back to the temple. There, under the priest's orders, Hoichi was made to take off his wet clothes and put on a new robe, and he was given food and drink. Additionally, the priest insisted that Hoichi thoroughly explain this astonishing behavior of his. Hoichi hesitated for a long time before speaking. However, realizing that his actions had genuinely alarmed and angered the compassionate priest, he resolved to break his silence and began to recount everything that had happened since the samurai's arrival. Then the priest said, "Poor boy. Hoichi, your situation is now very dangerous. It was indeed unfortunate that you did not tell me all of this earlier. Your musical talents have led you into a truly dreadful predicament. You must understand that you were not simply visiting someone's house, you were spending the night among the graves of the Heikei in the cemetery. Tonight, the attendants saw you sitting in the rain, but it was before the memorial grave of Emperor Antoku. Everything you imagined was merely an illusion, apart from the visitations of the dead. Once you have heard the words of the dead, you have essentially allowed yourself to be at their mercy. If you hear their words again, they will surely tear you apart. In any case, you will be killed sooner or later. Now, I cannot stay with you tonight. I have been called to conduct another memorial service. But before I go, I must write protective sutras on your body." Before sunset, the head priest and the temple steward stripped Hoichi bare and, using a brush, inscribed the words of the Heart Sutra on his chest, back, head, face, neck, arms, and legs, every part of his body, even the soles of his feet. Once they finished, the head priest instructed Hoichi, saying, "Tonight, as soon as I leave, you must sit on the porch and wait. Then, someone will come for you. However, no matter what happens, you must not respond or move. Remain silent and sit quietly, as if you were in meditation. If you move or make even the slightest sound, you will be cut to pieces. Do not be afraid, and do not think about calling for help. There is no chance of being saved if you call for help. If you follow my instructions without fail, the danger will pass, and there will be no more cause for fear. After sunset, the priest and the attendant left, and Hoichi sat on the engawa as instructed. He placed his biwa on the wooden floor beside him, assumed a meditative posture, and remained perfectly still, being careful not to cough or breathe audibly. He waited in this manner for several hours. Then he heard footsteps approaching from the road. The footsteps passed through the gate, crossed the garden, and came to a stop near the engawa, right in front of Hoichi. "Hoichi?" A powerful voice called. But the blind man held his breath and remained motionless. "Hoichi?" The terrifying voice called again. Then a third time, in a fierce tone, "Hoichi." Hoichi stayed as silent as a stone. Then, in a voice that seemed to complain, it said, "There's no answer. This won't do, we need to see where he is." Heavy footsteps climbed onto the engawa. The feet approached quietly and stopped beside Hoichi. For a moment, during which he felt his entire body tremble with the beating of his heart, it was completely silent. Finally, a rough voice spoke right next to him. "Here is the biwa, but to call it a biwa master, there are only 2 ears, no wonder there's no reply, there's no mouth to respond, besides the 2 ears, there's nothing left of the biwa master's body. Well then, let's take these ears to the Lord, as proof that I did as the Lord ordered." In that instant, Hoichi felt iron-like fingers grab his ears and tear them off. The pain was excruciating, but he did not let out a sound. The heavy footsteps retreated across the engawa, went down to the garden, made their way toward the road, and disappeared. Hoichi felt something warm and thick dripping from the sides of his head. Yet, he did not dare raise his hands. Before sunrise, the priest returned. He hurried to the back porch and slipped on something sticky, then was horrified and cried out. He saw by the lantern light that the sticky substance was blood. However, he recognized that Hoichi was sitting there in a Zen meditation posture, blood still oozing from his wounds. "Oh, poor Hoichi!" the astonished priest exclaimed. "What happened? Did you get hurt?" Hearing the priest's voice, the blind man felt reassured. Hoichi suddenly burst into tears, and recounted the events of that night. "Oh, poor Hoichi!" the priest cried out. "It's all my oversight. It's terrible, my negligence. I wrote scriptures all over your body, yet only your ears were left untouched. I entrusted the task of writing on your ears to the attendant. However, I should have checked to ensure that it was done correctly. This is entirely my fault. No, it's already too late to dwell on that, there's nothing to do but heal your wounds as soon as possible. Hoichi, cheer up. The danger has completely passed. You will never be troubled by such visitors again." With the help of a compassionate doctor, Hoichi's injuries soon healed. The story of this mysterious event spread far and wide, and Hoichi quickly became famous. Many noble people traveled to Akamagaseki to hear Hoichi's recitations, and he received large sums of money as gifts. Thus, Hoichi became wealthy. However, since that incident, he was known solely by the name Hoichi the Earless.